Wealth, where does it come from? There's a lot of talk these days about job creation and wealth, etc. So I thought it'd be worth a few minutes to try and understand exactly where does wealth come from and what is wealth. First, I went online and got a few definitions of wealth. One of them says the total value of accumulated assets owned. So that's pretty self-explanatory. If you have a lot of stuff, you're pretty wealthy. Another one is property that has economic utility, a monetary or an exchange value. So again, something that either you can exchange for money or you can exchange for some other good. Again, stuff dependent. Another one is the quality of profuse abundance. Again, something to do with having a lot of stuff. I think that's what profuse means. Here's an interesting one, the ability to command labor. This one will become a little clearer later on. And then my favorite definition is a commodity which, according to the rich, does not bring happiness, though according to the poor, it brings something quite closely resembling it. I thought this one was hilarious. But really, why do we even care about wealth? Well, for one thing, there's a direct relationship between a country's wealth and their population's standard of living. I don't know about you, but I would like to have at least maintain my standard of living or have it an ever-increasing standard of living, especially for my child. Another thing is wealth has an unusual capacity, if used correctly, to create even more wealth through investment, as long as you invest in the right things. Another thing, wealth is what we're going to use, or will use, ultimately, to pay our ever-increasing national debt. So that's something that's pretty important. So as you can see, wealth is actually a pretty important concept in our economy. We would all be a lot better off if more of us understood how it is created. Lord knows we're going to be needing a lot of it in the future. So let's think about those definitions that we just talked about. Most of them had something to do with abundance or more or something like that. So there definitely seems to be something to the concept that more goods are better. So let's assume we have Fred here who's operating within an economy, and in this economy Fred needs beer, bread, and ham to survive. So say he needs this for every day. So if he's self-sufficient, he's going to produce bread, beer, and ham just enough to get by. Again, that's self-sufficiency. He's living on the edge each day. But, he probably doesn't like to live on the edge, so one of the things he can do, he can try and work harder. So, Fred's not stupid and can be pretty industrious. He figures if he just works a little bit harder, maybe he can produce more and he'll have more goods. And it turns out he's right. And in this scenario, he can actually produce one incremental loaf of bread. So he's better off by one incremental loaf of bread. Now, again, looking at his productivity here, he figures, hey, I have a little skill at baking bread. Maybe I should just specialize in bread. What would my output be then? And it turns out he's correct again. When he specializes in bread, he can actually produce 5 loaves of bread. So his wealth, at least in terms of bread, has definitely gone up. Now the problem is, he's going to need to trade for the rest of the stuff he needs because he's specialized. So he's going to need to trade for his beer and his ham, or anything else he might need. This is where things get a little confusing because now Fred is going to need to trade his bread output for beer and ham. But in order to make these exchanges of value more efficient, people have thrown in an extra commodity and an extra step. This thing is called money. So what happens is Fred will actually trade his output of bread for money, this new commodity, and then in turn he'll trade the money for the ham and beer or other goods. But the important concept here is that he's still trading his output of bread for somebody else's output or production in terms of beer and ham. This can be a complicated concept if you don't think about it, or even if you do think about it. So I actually have a separate presentation on money if you're interested. But right now, let's get back to productivity and how that impacts wealth. So again, Fred's a pretty smart guy. He's got some friends that aren't stupid either, and they figure, maybe if we split up the bread making process amongst ourselves, it's really another form of specialization. Maybe our productivity would actually increase some more. So the 4 people split up the process of bread making into 4 pretty basic steps. You have, one person actually grows the wheat, so she takes seed, water, and labor and grows the wheat. Another guy takes the wheat and labor and creates flour. Third person takes the flour, water, heat, labor, whatever, makes bread. And then we have someone down at the end here who's actually working the front shop, the front counter of the bakery, actually selling the bread. The plan is they're going to make so much bread that they're not going to be able to eat all of it. So what happens? Now remember, Fred on his own could make 5 loaves of bread. So with 3 additional people, you would think that between them they could make 20 loaves of bread. Turns out through division of labor, though, you get some pretty significant productivity gains. In our little model here, instead of making 20 loaves of bread between the 4 of them, they're actually making 60. So you can see there is now more consumer goods, in this instance bread, within the economy as a whole. So the economy as a whole is now wealthier because there's more stuff in it. Let's take this a little further though. So we have this division of labor, and ultimately the bread will be sold to somebody, again, for money. So what happens? Well, you can see during the production, it's labor that is actually adding the exchangeable value at each step in the process. How do we know there's exchangeable value? Because each person sells their output to the person above them for more than it costs. So in this example, the miller pays $1 to the person growing the wheat. The baker pays $2.25 to the miller, who had only paid $1 for the wheat to begin with. So at each step, the exchangeable value is created and converted to cash. That's how we know that they've been creating exchangeable value. In addition, the purchaser will also ultimately part with some of her wealth, in this case $5, to transfer it to the producers. Now the $5 is actually spread out among the 4 people. And you can see in this example, 50 cents went to the retailer, $2.25 went to the baker, $1.25 went to the miller, and $1 went to the farmer, the wheat grower. But the important thing to remember here is the consumer is actually transferring some of her wealth to the producer. Another key concept is it's the consumer that is setting the value of the finished good, and therefore all of the exchangeable value that's created. So that is an interesting point and a very important point. Producers, although they would love to be able to mandate prices, they typically can't. But wait a minute. How did our consumer get her money to buy the bread in the first place? Well, maybe she brews beer. Now that's my kind of woman. Regardless, she's doing something somewhere that has output that she can trade. She traded it and she got money. The key point here is at some point all producers and consumers will change roles. So you may be producing something at one time, but after you exchange your output for cash, you'll typically be purchasing something with it shortly thereafter. That is, unless a producer is self-sufficient, like Fred was at the beginning, and only produces everything she needs to survive. In that case, she's really living on an island somewhere and isn't really part of the ongoing economy, so we're really not that interested. So recap, the value is created through labor. That's an important concept. But the labor needs to create incremental exchangeable value if it is going to increase the wealth in the economy. Something about just creating jobs isn't really the right way to go. Productivity makes labor more efficient, but it's still labor that adds the value. Purchasers, or consumers, determine the exchangeable value of a producer's output. Again, people would love to be able to mandate certain prices for their products, but they really can't. It's the purchaser or the consumer that sets the price. Finally, as producers and consumers constantly change roles, wealth continuously changes hands. It's created in one situation and destroyed in the other when it is consumed. So wealth is consistently changing hands throughout this economy. The implications of this are pretty straightforward. To pay for our ever-increasing government debt and fund our standard of living, our economy needs to create more wealth, at least more exchangeable value. It needs to create it faster than it's doing now because our government is growing so fast, at least the spending is. Simply creating jobs will not help. The jobs need to add incremental value within the economy, probably through production of consumer goods. The Soviet Union had virtually 100% employment, but their economy could not generate enough wealth to maintain itself. So creating jobs is not the end goal. Finally, we should probably start by looking to see what our government currently does that impedes our economy's ability to create the maximum wealth. Maybe we don't need to start doing something differently. Maybe we just need to stop doing something that we are. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this brief presentation on wealth and found it informative. Thanks.